Racist woman throws popcorn at black man in cinema, then realizes it's Big Shaq. She thought she was being bold, loud, untouchable. She threw the popcorn, smirked, and waited for the laughs. But the man she targeted stood up, and the theater fell silent. Because it wasn't just anyone, it was Big Shaq. No words, no chaos, just a quiet walk that shook the room. And in that silence, she felt every eye turn. She thought it was a joke, until the spotlight turned on her. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Downtown Los Angeles pulsed with its usual rhythm, sirens in the background, street vendors on corners, and summer heat shimmering off the asphalt. Among its quieter sanctuaries sat an old cinema, a relic from another time, with red velvet curtains and the scent of butter and age clinging to the walls. This wasn't the kind of place celebrities visited. It was too ordinary, too unpolished, which is exactly why Shaquille O'Neal chose it. He moved through the front doors unnoticed, hoodie drawn low, sunglasses shielding half his face. People might have done double takes at his height, at the unmistakable weight of his steps, but they didn't approach. Not here. Big Shaq was a giant, yes, but a quiet one today. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here to disappear. He slipped into row G, the back left seat. Not too far from the exit, not too close to the crowd. It was routine. He always picked this spot. The movie was some indie drama, the kind with long silences and social messages buried under layers of dialogue. Perfect for thinking, or not thinking. 2 minutes before the trailers rolled, she arrived. Brenda Whitmore stood in the aisle, with a small sigh of disappointment. Late 50s, pressed blouse, oversized Chanel bag, and an expression that had likely scolded many waiters over cold soup. Her gaze swept the row, pausing briefly on Shaq's hulking frame. A flicker of hesitation passed through her features. Then she moved in, settling into the seat directly beside him. It took less than 30 seconds for discomfort to ripple off her like static. She shifted her handbag to the far side, huffed when her arm brushed his, crossed her legs, uncrossed them, then crossed them again with a sigh sharp enough to cut glass. Shaq, silent as a mountain, didn't flinch. His eyes remained on the screen, now awash with pre-filmed trivia. Brenda leaned slightly away and muttered, just loud enough for her own satisfaction. Of all the seats, Shaq heard it. He was used to hearing it. He'd heard it in airports, in restaurants, once in a church pew. The difference was always the same. They never expected him to say anything back, and he didn't. Not because he couldn't, but because the words would be wasted. As the film began, Brenda's restlessness continued. Each time Shaq adjusted slightly, she reacted as if startled. When he pulled his phone to silence it, she eyed him like he was about to record the whole movie. And then came the final offense. He reached for a sip of his soda, arm moving past her seat. She recoiled. "Watch it," she hissed. Shaq paused, turning his head slightly. Just enough for her to glimpse the shape of his jawline, the way his lips pressed together, not with irritation, but restraint. He nodded once, slowly, then turned back to the screen. Brenda looked around, waiting to catch the eye of a manager, maybe even move seats, but the theater was nearly full, and no one seemed to notice her distress. She was alone in her discomfort, alone in her offense. That perhaps was the most intolerable part. Minutes passed. The film unfolded on screen, an immigrant story, laced with hardship and hope. Brenda scoffed at a particularly emotional scene. "So dramatic," she whispered, just loud enough to be heard. Shaq didn't react. His stillness made him larger somehow, more present. She fidgeted again. Her bag slipped slightly and landed halfway onto his leg. He gently moved it aside without a word. That's when it happened. Without even seeming to think, Brenda reached into her bag of popcorn and with an almost childlike spite, flung a handful toward him. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. The kernels hit his shoulder, bounced to the floor, and for a beat, time froze. Shaq didn't move. The screen flickered across his sunglasses, as the weight of the moment stretched like a pulled thread. People around them shifted. A couple heads turned. Brenda didn't apologize. In fact, she looked satisfied. Triumphant. Even. Shaq stood. Slowly, deliberately. The theater fell into a stunned hush. His full height seemed to swallow the aisle. No words. No accusation. He looked down at her, eyes hidden but presence undeniable. Then he walked out. Quietly. like a man who had just remembered something more important than rage. The door clicked shut behind him. Brenda exhaled, a tight, victorious sigh. She sat straighter, ate another piece of popcorn with deliberate nonchalance, but her eyes flicked to the seat where he'd been, then to the faces now turned toward her. No one spoke, but something in the air had shifted. A teen 2 rows back, camera phone low in his lap, stopped recording. He knew what he had just witnessed wasn't only about a man and a woman in a movie theater. It was bigger. It was louder than words, louder even than popcorn hitting fabric. Outside, the night was thick and warm. Shaq didn't go far. He stood near the edge of the parking lot, looking out over the city. He removed his hoodie and sunglasses, breathed in. He had felt smaller in that room than in any arena he'd ever played, and yet he had walked out taller than ever. The story wouldn't end here. Something had begun inside that theater, something quiet but unshakable, the kind of thing that catches fire when no one's watching. And somewhere behind him, a woman who thought she'd won a silent war was about to face a reckoning, far louder than she'd imagined. Brenda Whitmore didn't grow up in neighborhoods like the one the theater stood in. She was born into manicured lawns, conservative dinner parties, and rigid smiles in a gated Georgia community, where every interaction was filtered through status, silence, and selective history. Her father, an old money insurance mogul, kept their family tidy, politically, socially, and racially. She was raised to believe in standards. It was a word that echoed through her upbringing, like a sermon: standards in dress, in speech, in behavior, and most unspoken of all, standards in people. She carried that heritage like a perfume, subtle but lingering. You didn't need to hear her say it. You felt it in the clipped way she ordered lattes, in her gaze when someone mispronounced bruschetta, in how she clutched her purse tighter on escalators. And tonight, at the theater, surrounded by the ordinary, the scent of butter and city sweat pressing in, she felt especially out of place. When Shaquille had first sat next to her, she'd assumed he was just another tall guy in baggy clothes. The hoodie, the silence, it made him invisible in a way. But not for long. The size of him, the quiet gravity he carried, began gnawing at her comfort. Her discomfort wasn't loud, it was insidious. It was the narrowing of her eyes, the way her lips thinned every time he adjusted in his seat. She clutched her purse tighter, not out of any real danger, but out of a fear inherited and never questioned. Her grandmother once told her, "There's knowing your place, and there's staying in it." It was a phrase she'd grown up hearing in the subtext of family brunches and Christmas gatherings. And now here she was, elbow to elbow with a man whose very presence scraped against the edges of that deeply learned worldview. The movie on screen moved forward, scenes flickering with stories of hardship and systemic injustice. An immigrant family, poverty, resilience. It was the kind of narrative Brenda had always dismissed as overdone. She scoffed when a character cried over being denied a loan, muttering, "Why don't they just work harder?" No one responded. But Shaq, she noticed, turned his head slightly. He heard her. He always heard. With each passing minute, her whispers grew bolder. "This is just guilt propaganda. I don't come to the movies for lectures." She wasn't even sure who she was talking to anymore. Maybe just herself. Maybe to prove to someone, somewhere, that she hadn't softened. Shaq remained still. Stoic, focused on the screen. To Brenda, his silence wasn't strength. It was provocation. Why wasn't he reacting? Why didn't he respond, even with a glance or a sigh? She needed something from him. A crack, a mistake, something to justify the bile curdling inside her. Then came the scene. On screen, a young black man was stopped by police while walking home. No aggression, no threat, just existing. Brenda rolled her eyes and leaned toward Shaq, voice low and acidic. "People like you should stay in your place." She hadn't planned to say it. It just fell from her lips like a reflex. And then, without ceremony, she scooped a handful of popcorn and threw it at him. A childish gesture. Petty, mean. But in her mind it was power. It was drawing a line in the velvet upholstered sand. Shaq didn't move for a moment. The salt clung to his hoodie. The butter smeared faintly across his sleeve. Then, slowly, he stood. He didn't say a word. Didn't meet her eyes. His frame rose like a tide, steady and overwhelming. The entire row seemed to shift with him, as though pulled into his silent orbit. People noticed now. A woman in the row ahead turned around. A man behind shifted in his seat. The theater had changed. The air was heavier. Something had just happened, and no one could say exactly what. But they all felt it. Brenda sat frozen. She hadn't expected that silence would be louder than any confrontation. Shaq walked past her, down the aisle, and out the door. His shadow lingered for a breath longer before disappearing into the dim glow of the hallway. And just like that, the storm passed without thunder. Brenda adjusted herself, straightened her posture. She popped another piece of popcorn into her mouth like nothing had happened. Her heart pounded harder than she let on, but she told herself he deserved it, that she was just defending her space, that this was still her world. Behind her, unseen, a phone screen flickered off. A teenager near the back, one of those quiet, observant types, had captured the entire exchange. The mutterings, the popcorn, the walkout. His face held no smugness, just a strange solemnity. He knew the world would see this clip very differently than the woman on screen imagined. The film continued, unnoticed. Brenda couldn't concentrate. Her eyes darted from one side of the theater to the next. People were whispering now. She thought she saw a couple shake their heads in her direction. Was she imagining it, or had the balance of the room shifted? What had been power just minutes before now felt like exposure. She left before the credits rolled, walked out briskly, the sound of her heels echoing too loudly in the hallway. Her mind spun with justifications, with fragile outrage, but beneath it all, there was a tremor, a realization that something irreversible had just occurred. And the worst part, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Terrell Jennings sat 3 rows from the back, half hidden behind a worn hoodie and the screen glow of his phone. Though he wasn't watching it, his attention had been caught long before the first act of the film ever began. From the moment the tall man entered the theater and quietly took his seat, Terrell's instincts sharpened. There was something about the way the man moved, carefully, with intention, that intrigued him. Terrell wasn't a starstruck kid. He was a film student, trained to notice details, to watch for moments when the world shifts, and nobody realizes it yet. He had recognized Shaquille O'Neal immediately. The glasses didn't fool him, neither did the hoodie. Tyrell had grown up on NBA highlights and ESPN documentaries. But seeing Big Shaq in person, quiet, unguarded, and trying to disappear, was something else entirely. Tyrell kept his phone close, not to fanboy or sneak photos, but because he had a feeling, a hunch. And film had taught him that moments worth capturing rarely came with a warning. He watched the woman next to Shaq from the start too. Brenda, her discomfort radiated, like heat. She didn't look scared. She looked offended, as if the very presence of a black man her size near her personal space was a personal betrayal of her upbringing. Tyrell could see it in the way her mouth tightened, the way her hand clutched her handbag like it was slipping away from her. He didn't record it first. He watched. He observed the murmurs, the whispered commentary, the passive-aggressive scoffs. Brenda tossed into the air like darts. The more she talked, the more Tyrell leaned into the shadows of his seat. He knew this kind of sea. He'd seen it play out in high schools, on public buses, even once at a community college mixer. But seeing it happen to Shaq, that was something else. That was America's ugly face, staring right into its own reflection. When the popcorn flew, Tyrell's thumb was already tapping the red record button. The clip was short, barely 45 seconds. The muttered insult was faint, but clear enough. The popcorn unmistakable. The man's silent rise, towering and wounded. His quiet departure. It played like a short film without a single line of dialogue. Tyrell didn't celebrate. He didn't plan it. But he understood the weight of what he had captured. He uploaded the video the moment he stepped outside. The title came quickly. Even Big Shaq gets treated like this. He didn't tag anyone. No hashtags. Just raw footage. Within 2 hours his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. It started small. A couple retweets. Then comments. Then a quote tweet from a popular activist account. "We tell y'all every day. This isn't about fame. It's about being black in America." By the 4th hour, the video had passed 500,000 views. Brenda's face, once painted with smug satisfaction, now looped across every social media platform in the country. The internet moved like wildfire, relentless, indiscriminate. It didn't care about her job title or her clean tax history. It only cared about what it saw. A white woman demeaning a black man in a public space with entitlement and impunity. Tyrell refreshed his timeline as news outlets picked up the video. First local LA blogs, then national entertainment sites, and finally, major networks. Unprovoked attack on Shaquille O'Neal sparks online fury. The clip aired on the nightly news before Brenda even had time to brush the popcorn crumbs off her designer coat. Meanwhile, she sat comfortably unaware, sipping a late-night Cabernet in her penthouse condo just off Mulholland. She scrolled through real estate emails, glanced at a half-read historical novel on the coffee table, and chuckled to herself about the theatrical nonsense she'd endured at the cinema. In her mind, the night was behind her, no damage done, no consequences pending. Her phone was the first to break the illusion. Buzz. A missed call. Unknown number.
Buzz. A text from her daughter. Mom, what did you do?
Buzz. Another text. You're all over Twitter. Please tell me that's not you. She blinked, confused, clicked the link, and watched the clip. She saw herself, the tight clutch of her purse, the venom in her voice, the popcorn flying like a grenade of humiliation, and Shaq, rising without fury, without reaction, walking away with a dignity that made her smallness impossible to ignore. She didn't finish the clip. She couldn't. In the first wave of panic, she called her assistant, voicemail. Then her firm's managing partner, no answer. Then her daughter again, straight to voicemail. Her inbox swelled. You're trending. Unacceptable behavior. Your license should be pulled. What example are you setting? Words layered like punches. Only no one had touched her. In Tyrell's apartment across town, a different energy pulsed. He wasn't thrilled. He wasn't basking in likes or comments. He was thinking about what came next. Because virality doesn't end at the video. It begins there. It shifts public memory. It changes lives. And while he knew what this meant for Brenda, he also knew the weight it could place on Shaq, a man who had only asked for peace in a public space. He closed his laptop. The room buzzed, not just with messages but with meaning. He hadn't filmed for fame. He'd filmed for truth. And now that truth had teeth. Shaq, somewhere in the dark of his home gym, stretching silently under the soft hum of fluorescent lights, hadn't even seen the clip yet. But the world had, and the eyes that had watched from the shadows now held the mirror up for everyone to see. Brenda Whitmore drove into her gated community as dusk settled. Manicured hedges and stone pillars loomed at the entrance, nightlights glowing against the elegant facade. The neighborhood continued its nightly hush, but inside her gated world, Brenda's phone buzzed incessantly. Dozens of messages, missed calls, and alerts. She flicked a glance at her dashboard's digital feed showing the word trending. She tried to focus on the road but found herself distracted. She parked her sedan in the garage, the space polished and impersonal, the walls echoing with her heartbeat. Inside, her phones kept lighting up like northern lights, bright, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. In the living room, television cameras had parked themselves just outside the front gate. Glowing lenses captured her upscale home, her life, now a stage for public scrutiny. Brenda moved through her house, the place once a sanctuary, now a judgment room. A luxury real estate brochure lay open on the marble coffee table, showing another home she had to sell. That task suddenly lost its meaning. She approached the foyer mirror. Her reflection looked calm, composed until she studied it. Red-rimmed eyes, tense lips that quivered at the corners. Even if her voice stayed tight and flat when she answered her phone. Official calls began bleeding in. First from her assistant, then from the office, then from her mother-in-law, all asking the same question. Brenda, what happened? She paused before answering. That mirrored woman was not the one who had gone to the theater. That night felt like someone else's memory. She answered it all with rehearsed politeness, a practiced apology, but carefully avoided admitting guilt. She had been provoked. She had been justified. She told it to every caller, but each replay revealed cracks in the script. Her voice trembled, then steadied. Her eyes flicked the cameras across the street. By nightfall, the local news had camped outside her gate, a small herd of media vans, flashing corporate logos amid the hedges. Brenda pressed her palm to the glass door, watching them. The camera lights pulsed like blame. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Not fair." She thought of Shaq walking out so calmly. The dignity of his silence haunted her like a judge's gavel. A new urgency pulsed as her assistant emailed her a statement suggestion. Resignation or suspension. Brenda sank into the chaise lounge, hands trembling. She delayed it, trying to reason with herself. She couldn't. This wasn't a crisis she had planned for. Her career built on polished transactions and affluent trust was dissolving in public opinion. She had no playbook. Morning arrived with artificial brightness, and no relief. An email from her firm's managing partner lay in her inbox. Effective immediately, pending review. Suspension, unpaid, until they could assess public risk. It felt like a severing. The email echoed in her skull. She staggered in her foyer, flanked by silent presidential portraits and antique rugs. She had never faced anything worse inside her own home.
Then came Aunt Helen, the matriarch, who'd shaped Brenda's life since childhood. She arrived in high heels, lipstick immaculate. Aunt Helen sat Brenda down, scanning her with sharp concern. "You're not in trouble with the world, you're in trouble with yourself." Her voice was soft, but the words felt like cold steel.
Brenda froze. She hadn't told anyone about the silent teachings she'd received, that black men were threatening, that her quiet unease was justified, that Shaq's size, his silence, his presence equaled danger. Aunt Helen studied her expression. "Don't lie to me, Brenda. You always judged him before he did anything." The mirror cracked inside Brenda's mind. But the hardest confrontation waited upstairs. Aubrey, her daughter, stood in her doorway, a college sophomore, thoughtful, brimming with ideals. She held her phone like a shield. Her eyes were red, the same shade as Brenda's had been. "Mom, do you even see how broken you are?" Aubrey's voice cracked as she spoke, then fled like a snapped string, leaving tears behind. "You threw something at him, popcorn for Christ's sake. And you whispered insulting words. You looked down on him just for existing." Brenda felt the world tighten. She tried to say something, anything, but Aubrey cut in. "You were shouting in whispers at a great man, my hero." Brenda's hands clenched. All the justifications she'd rehearsed collapsed. She had judged him for his skin and size. She had acted out of fear, not reason. The words, the popcorn, humiliation, and silence. She had been cruel without cause. She had taught cruelty to her daughter. Aubrey turned away, tears staining her shirt. Brenda stumbled, tears choking her. For the first time, she confronted the truth in full. She had hurt someone who hadn't harmed her. She had attacked with a gesture so small, yet so corrosive. Her head pounded. Tears blurred her vision. Her mother-in-law wrapped arms around her after Aubrey had left the room. Younger woman weeping quietly in the hallway. She held Brenda's trembling body. "We taught you this," she whispered. "Your father, your grandmother." There, in the hallway's soft light, Brenda recognized how trauma and tradition had built invisible walls around her heart. Later, late into the night, Brenda wandered the house in exhaustion. The cameras outside had moved on, but inside, reporters crawled through her silence. In the quiet, she heard her daughter's whispered accusation. "You don't even see how broken you are." The words clawed at her. She thought of Shaq, and how he bore the shame, not with rage, but with calm refusal to retaliate. She thought of herself entangled in a life where fear masqueraded as civility, implicit bias dressed as standard. Brenda realized something trembled inside her, the foundation of her identity. If she wanted to survive this, she couldn't step back. She had to step forward. She sank to the rug, pressed her forehead to the floor. The house glowed around her, pristine and judgmental. She realized tonight she would lie down among brands and boards, and die a little if she didn't change. As midnight approached, she drafted an email to her managing partner, her hands trembling. She didn't compose a defense. Not exactly. She offered to step aside from high-end clients, to do paid sensitivity training at the community center, to spend time volunteering. She would sit. She would speak. She drafted a letter to Shaq, unsent, explaining her fear, her apology, her willingness to learn. She almost deleted it, but kept it open. She slept at dawn, fractured and awake, clutching her phone in the darkness. By the time sunlight crept into the living room, Brenda Whitmore had begun to unravel, and perhaps to recommit to a new way of living. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the community center, painting warm stripes across the worn hardwood floors. Shaquille O'Neal, dignaculous in any room he entered, walked in quietly, accompanied by his mother, Lucille. The building was familiar to him, but he rarely visited openly. His support was meant to be quiet, behind the scenes, shielding the kids from the glare of celebrity. Today, however, the space felt different. The whispers of yesterday lingered in the air, an echo that followed him in, no matter how gentle his steps. In the entryway, a dozen youth aged 10 to 17 greeted him by name. Not Mr. O'Neal, not Shaq, but coach big. Each handshake and pat on the back held a story, a past burden eased. As they dispersed to their morning activities, reading, basketball drills, art projects, Shaq and Lucille took a seat on the old leather couch near the front window. The building smelled of sneakers and acrylic paint, a scent Shaq always found comforting. Lucille scanned the center with quiet pride in her eyes. Strong, resilient, unfiltered, she was the heart of his strength. Today she noticed something softer in his posture, an uncharacteristic weariness. She reached over and squeezed his hand. Their connection was carved from decades of shared history, from a black neighborhood in Newark to arenas of fame, fighting for dignity at every step.
You okay, baby?
She asked. Shaq exhaled slowly. I will be. He paused, watching a group of kids reciting homework answers in the next room. But yesterday, he closed his eyes, as if he could still see the popcorn scattering, feel the sting of microaggression in that tiny container. I hate that it shakes me. Lucille nodded. Steady. It hurts because it was wrong, and because it reminded you of everything you've carried. Even before all this, she gestured toward the medals and plaques lining the walls, symbols of triumph, but also of fights fought invisibly. Being the bigger man doesn't mean not feeling the hit. It means choosing how you respond. He looked at her, grateful, yet haunted. They saw me leave, but they didn't see me collect myself in the hallway. They didn't see me breathe 3 times before I stepped into my car. Lucille's gaze sharpened. You did it when it mattered. He nodded, folding internal pain into resolve. But I want them to understand. The kids here, they deserve more than a quiet example. They deserve an answer. She smiled softly. Then you'll give it. They moved to the gym, where the rims glinted in the morning light. Shaq grabbed a ball and offered it to a shy boy named Devin, who joined the center after being referred by school. He was tall for his age, but locked inside a shell of insecurity. Shaq knelt, looked him in the eye, and said, You want a Devin's toes tapped the floor. He passed. Shaq insisted. He stood, passed the ball again, and Devin took it. A shot wide, but Shaq smiled. Again, and again. After 3 misses, he made a basket. His triumph lit a spark in Devin's eyes. Shaq nodded, and moved on, letting the boy bask in his own success. In the arts room, he stopped by Maya, a 15-year-old graffiti artist. She worked on a mural featuring hands reaching upward, colorful, defiant. They discussed themes of support, lifting others, connecting to hope. He asked her about her vision. She told him about a sister in foster care, about her mom's struggles. His questions were careful, respectful. She opened up. He listened. Throughout the morning, he engaged not as a star, but as a mentor. His presence was powerful, because it was given without seeking acclaim. Lucille watched from the doorway, knowing each moment healed more than bruised spirits. At midday they sat for lunch in the break room. Kid-designed tablecloth, mismatched chairs, leftover pasta in Tupperware. Lucille asked, You think people understand what you try to build here? Shaq shrugged, eating quietly. Some do. But yesterday, that popcorn, it drew attention to something bigger. Not just how people treat me, but how people treat anyone they feel threatened by. Lucille nodded. Seeing that you have a chance to use it. She bit her lip. Not to teach anger, but to teach strength and humility, to open doors. He looked out the window at the playground. Kids laughing, basketballs bouncing. I want them to know the world can spit on you. But you don't have to spit back. Later, as they toured a new after-school classroom, Shaq paused by a bulletin board, titled Dream Big. Each note was a child's goal. Artist, engineer, teacher. He reached out, leaned closer. Lucille followed. Every one of them carries a story, she said. Their pain isn't always visible. He thought of Brenda, skilled, educated, yet marred by fear. He thought of millions who saw the video and recoiled, or rallied. But this was real. Here, impact was quietly rooted, daily. Every test passed, every art project completed, every shot taken, an answer louder than headlines. By late afternoon, the morning's tension seemed to recede into purpose. He met with the center's director, sharing plans to expand programming. They discussed funding, schedules, volunteer drives. He nodded, firm and focused. This was legacy building, not for applause but for lifetimes to come. Before leaving, he circled back to meet the kids one last time. Devin waved. Maya smiled. Others gathered around. He high-fived them individually. Each touch conveyed a message. You matter. You belong. You're seen. He and Lucille walked out together, shoulders squared. Outside, the California sun leaned westward, bathing the lot in golden light. He reached for his mother's hand. She squeezed it.
Whatever happened last night, it still stung. But in this place, in these kids, he found resolution. Not by seeking justice from the woman in the theater, but by constructing something better than fear. By whispering a louder truth. Community over division. Respect over resentment. Presence over absence.
And as they drove away past murals and bouncing basketballs, Shaq felt lighter. The world's noise, its judgment, its cruelty, couldn't compete with the quiet power born here, in humility and shared strength. This was his answer. Brenda sat rigid in the borrowed studio chair, the lights glaring too harshly on her powdered face. Her blouse, chosen by a last-minute PR consultant, was a soft pastel to offset the brewing storm around her. The crew whispered behind cameras, exchanging glances. No one said it aloud, but the air buzzed with silent skepticism. This wasn't a redemption arc. They were filming damage control. The publicist, a young woman from a boutique crisis firm, stood off-camera mouthing cues. Look sincere. Keep the tears genuine. Avoid legal terms. Stay away from the phrase "I'm not racist." But Brenda nodded, heart pounding. She didn't want to be here. She didn't believe she needed to be. But the fallout had grown louder, thicker, impossible to ignore. The interview began with gentle questions. Her voice trembled, not quite from shame, but from the weight of performance. She spoke of her past, her accomplishments, her commitment to charity. Then the tone shifted. The interviewer leaned in. You've seen the video. What's your explanation for what happened? Brenda swallowed hard. Her rehearsed words came like drops from a strained faucet. I was uncomfortable. It was a crowded theater. I felt overwhelmed. She blinked at the camera. I didn't know who he was. Silence stretched. Then she said it. This is cancel culture. People make one mistake, and suddenly your whole life is gone. The air in the studio tightened. The video, uploaded within the hour, was devoured online, like fresh meat tossed into a fire. Commenters lit up with fury. So you needed him to be famous to treat him like a person. Not knowing him was the problem, Brenda. Cancel culture? You assaulted someone and walked away smug. Within 6 hours, the clip had surpassed 2 million views. Within 10, the publicist dropped her as a client. Brenda tried not to look at the comments, but they seeped through in headlines, text messages, even phone calls from old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Most were not reaching out in sympathy. They were pulling away, cutting ties, distancing themselves from the woman now dubbed the popcorn bigot. Aubrey came home the next night, storming in without a word. Her bag dropped at the door. Brenda rose from the couch to hug her, but her daughter stepped back. You made it worse, she said flatly. I begged you to stay quiet, to reflect, and you played victim on camera. I didn't mean, Brenda started, but Aubrey shook her head. You don't get to mean anymore. You get to learn, but you won't. That night, Aubrey packed her things and left without saying goodbye. Brenda watched her drive off through the same gates that once promised security. She felt the cold bite of abandonment, but still, somewhere deep inside, the lesson hadn't settled. She blamed timing. She blamed optics. She didn't blame herself. The next morning brought a letter slid under her front door. No stamp, no return address. Just one line, written in red ink. We saw you. She opened the blinds slowly. Nothing, just the usual suburban silence. But when she stepped outside to collect the paper, she noticed its spray paint on the sidewalk across the street. We saw you. Not angry, not obscene, just chillingly calm. More followed. A week later, the community mailboxes bore the same message. We saw you. Then the tennis court wall. And a park bench. Not in vandalism's usual fury. This was methodical. A reminder. A surveillance. Her neighbors, once polite if aloof, now averted their eyes. Conversations stopped when she approached. Her HOA president sent an email titled Community Standards and Public Image. It referenced an emergency board meeting to discuss her continued residence. The message wasn't subtle. Brenda, the top-selling realtor in the area for 5 years, had become a liability. Each day her world shrank. Groceries were delivered. Hair appointments canceled. Her Pilates class politely told her the schedule was under review. What was once a meticulously curated life began to collapse from the inside. And yet, even then, she didn't fully see it. She saw loss. She saw embarrassment. She saw consequences. But she didn't see the act, the kernel of cruelty, the whispered prejudice, the dismissal of a man's humanity because he took up space she felt entitled to. She clung to narratives like armor. I panicked. It was instinct. I didn't mean harm. It's just being blown out of proportion. But these shields grew thin under scrutiny. The mirror cracked further with every silent stare from her community. One afternoon, as she stepped onto her porch, she spotted a child riding by on a bike. The girl was maybe 10, ponytail bouncing behind her helmet. She stopped in front of Brenda's house, looked directly at her, then rode away without a word, but with a gaze that burned. That was the moment it hit. Not all at once, but like a fracture finally splitting. The child's stare had no hate in it, only understanding, disappointment. She had seen the clip. She had processed it. And in her young eyes, Brenda wasn't a villain. She was a warning. Brenda closed the door, back against the wood, chest heaving. For the first time, she saw herself not as the woman being judged, but the woman who needed to be, not to be punished, to be changed. 3 days had passed since Brenda last opened her front door without a second thought. Now, every knock, every leaf scratching across the driveway made her flinch. Her phone had grown quiet, not from peace but from abandonment. Emails slowed. The HOA hadn't followed up yet, but the message had been clear. She had become the sort of presence even silence wanted to avoid. It was in that fragile silence that the letter arrived. Not in an envelope, bearing a logo or typed return address, but in handwriting that was firm, deliberate, and oddly familiar. Just her name on the front, Brenda Whitmore. No title, no formality. She hesitated before opening it, scanning the blocky, masculine script. Just 2 lines. Come to the community center. No press. Just you. Shaq. She read it once. Twice. A third time. Her chest tightened. It didn't sound like bait. It didn't reek of public traps or orchestrated shame. It sounded still, measured. A man's hand offering her a step into what? She didn't know. At first, she left it on the counter. For hours. She brewed coffee, cleaned windows that weren't dirty, rearranged her bookshelf. But the letter stayed, and with every passing glance, it grew heavier. Finally, as evening crept toward dusk, she grabbed her coat. The drive was longer than it looked on the GPS. The city grew unfamiliar the deeper she went. No hedged lawns or luxury SUVs, just old strip malls, corner stores, playgrounds surrounded by chain-link fences. A different Los Angeles, the one she'd always driven around, not through. The community center stood at the corner of a quiet street. Modest, weathered, but alive. Murals wrapped around the walls, depictions of family, struggle, unity, hope. She parked across the street, pulse loud in her ears. For a moment, she considered turning around. But then, like a thread pulling her forward, she crossed the street and stepped through the front door. The receptionist recognized her immediately. How could she not? But instead of coldness, there was only a small nod, and then a wave toward the gym. No announcement, no warning, just silent allowance. The hallway smelled of crayons and sweat. Laughter echoed from somewhere distant. Brenda's steps were hesitant, eyes scanning every corner like a guest in someone else's memory. And in many ways, she was. Her first surprise came in the form of photographs lining the walls. Not celebrities or donors, but kids, smiling, holding certificates, standing in graduation robes. Below each photo a single word: resilient, creator, dreamer, overcomer. Brenda paused at one, a boy with tired eyes but a victorious smile. The caption read, future lawyer. She moved on. A woman stood at a classroom door, mid-50s, short haircut, strong arms folded across her chest. She eyed Brenda with a sharpness that wasn't hostility. It was judgment earned and waiting. You're here, she said, voice firm. Brenda nodded, unsure of what to say. The woman stepped forward. I'm Lucille O'Neal, Shaquille's mother. Brenda's heart stumbled. Lucille didn't extend a hand. Instead, she tilted her head. He asked me not to talk you out of this, so I won't. A beat passed. But you should understand what this place is. It's not just a shelter or charity. It's a rebirth machine. and not everyone deserves to walk through its doors. Brenda nodded again, eyes stinging. I'm not sure I do. Lucille's lips pursed, a flicker of something approval. Recognition? We'll see. She led Brenda down the hallway and opened a side door without a word. Inside was a storytelling circle. Chairs arranged, kids gathered, teens mostly. A young woman sat in the middle, recounting her life, foster homes, courtrooms, bad decisions, second chances. Brenda slipped into the back quietly. She listened as stories unfolded, like open wounds sewn shut with strength. A boy talked about his father in prison. A girl described hiding in closets during raids. Another shared the joy of passing a math test after failing for 2 years straight. No one cried. Not one person asked for pity. They shared their pain like builders laying bricks. This is what I stood on. This is what I built. Brenda sat still, shame curling in her stomach. These were the people she'd been taught to fear, to look through. And here they were, stronger than she had ever been. She heard laughter from the gym, drawn like a tide. She moved toward it. And there he was, Shaquille O'Neal, towering in a loose tee, dribbling a basketball around 2 kids with the grace of a giant unbothered by cameras. He spun past, missed a shot deliberately so a boy could block him, and feel like a king. They laughed. He clapped for them. The rim rattled, sneakers squeaked. Not a trace of yesterday's storm lingered on his face. He looked up once and saw her. Didn't stop. Didn't pause. Just smiled faintly. A knowing look. Then he returned to the game. Brenda stood frozen. He wasn't waiting for an apology. He hadn't brought her here for confrontation. He had invited her to witness something she had never understood. Community, resilience, real power. Not the kind her world had taught her to chase, but the kind born from humility, compassion, and persistence. And as she stood there, surrounded by the thumping echo of basketballs and laughter, the last of her old defenses crumbled. Shaq wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering her a glimpse of what it looked like to change. And she knew deep down this was the beginning of something much harder and more necessary than redemption. It was the beginning of self-confrontation. The room was small, unremarkable. An office tucked in the back of the community center with faded blue walls, a desk cluttered with paperwork, and 2 mismatched chairs. No cameras, no lights, just the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the sound of Brenda's heels clicking nervously against the linoleum floor as she stepped inside. Shaq was already seated, his frame too large for the chair. His shoulders relaxed but unreadable. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He simply gestured to the empty chair across from him. Brenda hesitated before sitting. Her throat was dry, palms damp, words nowhere near ready. For a few moments, they said nothing. Shaq looked at her the way a mountain might look at a stone. Not angry, not cold, but enduring. She felt the weight of it. I wasn't sure you'd show, he said, voice low but steady. I almost didn't, she replied, her voice smaller than she'd expected. A pause stretched between them. I don't really know where to start, she admitted, looking down at her hands. I've written versions of this, rehearsed them, but none of them felt true. Shaq nodded slightly, waiting. Brenda drew in a shaky breath. What I said, what I did in that theater. It wasn't just a bad moment. It wasn't an accident. Her eyes met his for the first time. It was something I was taught to do, and I didn't question it until I saw myself through the world's eyes. Shaq didn't move. He didn't interrupt. My father, she continued, used to say, be careful around the big ones. Always whispered, like it was some code. He meant black men. He made fear a normal part of my upbringing. He never had to say hate, just taught me to avoid, to brace myself, to pull away. I thought that was just being smart. Her voice cracked. So when I saw you, I didn't see a man. I saw something I was told to fear. And I'm ashamed of that. I thought I was past it, you know. Successful, educated, charitable. But it was always there, underneath. Shaq leaned back slightly. His expression didn't soften. If anything, it deepened. Lines at the corner of his mouth pulling downward in contemplation. Brenda continued, words spilling now. I've hurt people before. Subtly, a turn of the head. A comment passed off as a joke. But I've never seen it all reflected back at me the way it happened that night. I watched the video, and I saw a monster. Her voice trembled. Not you, me. Still, he didn't speak. And the worst part, she said, pressing her fist to her chest, is that if you weren't famous, I might have never known your name. You might have just been another man I humiliated and forgot. Shaq finally sat forward. His elbows rested on his knees, eyes steady. You did see a monster. That's the truth. But not because of what I did. Because of what you carried. Brenda's lips trembled. But she nodded. I've been seen that way my whole life, he said slowly. Walking into stores, getting pulled over, sometimes even in the NBA locker rooms. That's not new to me. What is new is seeing someone admit it without excuse. He leaned back again. But you need to understand something. This isn't about me forgiving you. I don't owe you that. I know, she whispered. You don't get to undo it, he continued. You don't get to erase it from the internet, or from that kid's memory who recorded it. But you do get to choose who you are from here. Brenda's breath hitched. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't bring you here for an apology, he added. I brought you here because the world's filled with people who will never get this chance, who never get a second to reflect. You got yours. So what are you going to do with it? She looked up again, eyes glassy. I want to change. I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't even know how to start. But I know I can't go back to who I was. Shaq nodded. That's the first real thing you've said today. There was no victory in the room. No dramatic swell of music. No tidy resolution. Only two people sitting in a cramped office, trying to find truth among the ruins of shame and silence. Brenda wiped her eyes. I keep thinking about how you walked away. How you didn't say a word. I've said enough in my life, Shaq replied. Sometimes silence makes more noise. The weight of his restraint settled on her like a boulder. The dignity, the control, the choice to not react with the same cruelty that had been thrown at him. I don't deserve kindness, she said. Shaq gave a slight shrug. It's not about deserving. It's about doing better. She stood, slowly, unsure if the conversation was over. He didn't move to stop her. But as she reached the door, he said one final thing. Brenda, he said. She turned. When people show you grace, don't treat it like charity. Treat it like a job. Something you work at every day. She nodded once. And then, without another word, she stepped out into the hallway, into a building still buzzing with laughter and life, into a world she would never look at the same way again. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. It was something more honest. Awakening. Brenda's mornings began with a slow awakening, not to the chime of messages or the buzz of notifications, but to the quiet echo of yesterday's promises. She'd arrived at the community center early, slipping in before the staff were awake, determined to earn her place through action, not words. She carried a tote bag filled with lesson plans and art supplies, props for her new purpose. With each unpacked box of colored pencils, each folded poster board, she felt a fragment of her old self peeling away. Across town, Tyrell Jennings wrestled with his own burden of visibility. He filmed in a bland office space branded with the center's logo, a follow-up video featuring Shaquille O'Neal, where his aim wasn't to reopen old wounds, but to ask a difficult question, one that ripped open national debates. Can forgiveness change how we see ourselves? The clip, a short yet powerful exchange, featured Shaq speaking with clarity and philosophy about empathy, redemption, and responsibility. The upload button shuddered under Tyrell's finger, but he clicked. Within hours, the video went viral again, reigniting conversations across social platforms and news outlets. Comments poured in. Some lauded Brenda's path to self-awareness. If more people learned what she did, we'd be better off. Others branded her irredeemable. No apology can wipe that smear. Mainstream media seized the narrative. Tabloid headlines flickered like neon. Popcorn no more, Brenda's redemption tour. Contrasted with she got off easy. He deserves better. Opinion pieces lined columns. Some praising the center as a model for restorative justice. Others warning against the perils of forgiveness culture. The internet, once her executioner, became, for some, a lesson in collective awakening. Back at the center, Brenda felt the weight of reaction on her shoulders. Each morning, as she greeted the children, she fought for authenticity. No grand speeches, no tearful apologies. She showed up, she sorted art supplies, she stayed late to help tutor struggling kids. She swept the gym floor after basketball drills. She reminded the kids quietly that mistakes can be powerful teachers, but only if we refuse to repeat them. And in staff meetings, she listened more than she spoke. She became a resource, not for PR spinning, but for facing prejudice head-on. She shared her story once, in a training session, not as a warning, but as confession. I thought I was better, she said, voice steady. I wasn't. I didn't see the poison in fear until I spat it at someone. Now I have to live with that. She waited, watched the faces, some nodding, some distant, some learning. Outside, her former neighborhood swirled with rumor and reaction. Town hall meetings sprung up, organized by local churches and civic groups, where residents debated whether Brenda should remain on the board of their children's sports teams. Some defended her newfound commitment to learning. Others insisted her actions were too steeped in bias to warrant second chances. Paintings bearing the phrase "do better" were displayed in local libraries. Graffiti on community skate ramps read, poignantly, "Mistakes aren't crimes but denial is." Copies of the original video were shared in neighborhood schools as discussion prompts. Why did she react that way? What would you do? The screening ended with silent reflection, punctuated by the occasional sniffle from a teenager. Nationally, podcasts featured segment spots, the uses of shame, when giants forgive, redemption or trend. Panelists debated restitution versus reputation. Some emphasized Brenda's bravery in staying visible. Others suggested her volunteering was performative. Shaq emerged in public discourse as a moral anchor, a man who made headlines but refused to be defined by them. Still, despite the storm, the heart of the story lay within the dusty walls of the center, where lives unfolded quietly. One afternoon, Brenda joined Tyrell for an impromptu live stream on the center's Facebook page. The camera captured her unpacking a canvas, arranging paintbrushes. Kids marched in after school drilling. Shaq walked by, patted Brenda's shoulder, smiled. Tyrell clicked record. "People keep asking why I stay here," Brenda said softly, voice steady. "It's simple. This is where the hardest work happens. Not on screens. Not in press conferences. Here, you learn that belonging comes from choosing to stay, even when forgiveness is hard." Comments scrolled, "Thank you for your honesty. Learning how powerful community can be. But also still too soon. Old habits die hard." She paused, then replied calmly, "Healing doesn't come in a day, or a tweet. I'm ready to do the long work." In that moment, the center became a microcosm of the larger world. Hope and skepticism duking it out in real time. Tyrell smiled from behind the camera. He cut the feed. "She's earned it," he said quietly, almost to himself. Brenda remained silent. But she looked at Shaq. He nodded at her. No words, no pomp, but a gesture of acknowledgement. A reminder, this wasn't about her redemption, but about collective awakening. The next morning, an article in an education magazine featured the center's program, opening with the story of the popcorn incident and concluding with a model for community reconciliation. It named Brenda and Shaq as unlikely partners in change. The tagline read, "From confrontation to construction." Brenda clipped the article and taped it to the center's staff board. She didn't say it out loud, but her silent action said enough. Later that week, Tyrell moved on from the center's invitation and conducted a short interview with Shaq. The segment began with Tyrell's familiar face. "Coach Big, what's the difference between reacting and responding?" Shaq paused. "Reacting is letting fear run your show. Responding is choosing who you want to be, no matter who's watching." Tyrell's follow-up. "And Mrs. Whitmore?" Shaq exhaled. "She's choosing. That's what matters." The clip reached millions. Some viewers cheered. Others barked in comment wars. But many went deeper, sharing the segment in groups and chats, sparking six-figure shares of school curriculums and church groups. The phrase "respond, don't react" began trending with Coach Big Challenge, where people shared video examples of uncomfortable moments turned into teaching opportunities. Brenda saw it all. She didn't watch every clip, but she felt their reach. A kindness challenge here, a public apology protocol there. Even a local film student created a short documentary about the entire situation. He interviewed kids, staff, neighbors, and ended with Brenda asking, "How do I show I'm not just sorry but better?" But the heartache remained. She still might lose her condo in the HOA vote. Some friends were gone forever. The black cloud of her past actions still hung. Some believed forgiveness was irreversible. Others insisted it was unconditional. Yet within the center's walls, something new had taken root. A collective reckoning with fear, bias, and humility. A lesson in community that didn't end with apology, but kept growing with response. And as media zoomed out, Brenda shook her head at the center's whiteboard, where Devin had written in crayon, "Community over conflict." Below, Maya had added, Actions speak louder than apologies. Brenda paused, her eyes on the words written by children she was now there to serve. The internet might never forget, but here, with each quiet act of service, she learned the hardest growth happens when the world has moved on, and you're still standing. The glow from the city seeped through Shaquille O'Neal's gym windows, staining the floorboards with gold as evening settled over Los Angeles. He stood before a muted television, watching a documentary created by Tyrell. The soft hum of voices and distant laughter echoed on screen, murmurs from the community center, interviews with youth, snippets of Brenda volunteering. The suddenness of it all caught him off guard. How a single moment popcorn thrown became a catalyst of discussion, of reflection, of transformation. He pressed his hand to the screen as if trying to touch the ripples of that change. There was his face calm, stoic, yet somehow vulnerable. But the documentary didn't reduce him to the tall man in the hoodie. It showed him as coach, mentor, son, neighbor, as absent greatness, gentle, self-assured, unwavering in humility. His mother, Lucille, later watched a segment where he spoke about forgiveness. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she smiled proud. Shaq turned the TV off, silent in the dim room. He considered how far this journey had taken them, from a brief moment of humiliation in a crowded theater to a nationwide conversation. And yet it felt small to him, like a bud of something living and unfinished. He breathed in, ready for the next quiet day of action. A knock came at the door. Devin, one of the teens from the center, stood framed in shadow, a hopeful grin across his face. Behind him, other kids spilled into the room, shy and uncertain. "Coach?" Devin asked. Shaq's face lit up. "Hey, big man. Come in." They filed in. Devin held a stack of hand-drawn portraits. Shaq in a cape, Shaq with a basketball, Shaq handing a young version of himself a diploma. Each image came with a message. "Thank you. You inspired me. You changed my path." Shaq accepted them quietly, letting each heartfelt illustration settle in his heart. He knelt down to their level. "This means more than fame, more than anything." He hugged each one. Silence felt bigger than words. The kids walked out, letting the drawings flutter like flags in the stillness he'd earned. Brenda sat at her desk late into the night. The lights were dim. The page before her remained blank, a letter she would never send. The stationery was expensive, parchment with a watermark of a quill pen. She'd agonized over her first words. She thought of Shaquille O'Neal, Lucille, a rock who had stood firm when the world swayed. Words of gratitude welled within Brenda, but each version wound into apology, backtracked into explanation, then dissolved under self-doubt. She closed her eye. "Dear Mrs. O'Neal." She imagined the words. How do you thank the mother of a man who could have raged, but didn't, who could have retaliated, but chose something else, strength tempered with grace? She wrote, "Thank you for raising a man with silence that speaks louder than noise, for teaching him that strength isn't in fists, but in the choice to hold peace, even when betrayed. I didn't know I needed someone like him in my life, until I saw what true dignity looks like." Then she stopped. The pen hovered, tears running quietly down her cheeks. She folded the paper carefully, closed the desk drawer, and slid the note in. She would never send it. It wasn't for anyone else to read. It was hers to keep proof that change had begun from the inside. Weeks later, the cinema reopened. Shaq, now casually dressed in jeans, in a hoodie, walked in at dusk. No entourage, no cameras, just him and the crush of expectant strangers, seeking solace in dim lights and projected stories. He went to the same row he had left days before, easing into the seat. A child, perhaps 7, nudged her mother in the next seat. "Mama, isn't that Big Shaq?" she whispered. Her mother glanced over, nodded. "It is. He's just here to enjoy the movie." The girl looked up at Shaq with wide eyes. He noticed, and this time he didn't hide. He smiled gently, then looked back at the screen. Across the row, a man tucked the girl in, as the lights dimmed. "See that man?" he whispered. "He changed the world with silence." The girl's eyes grew even larger. In the silence that followed, Shaq felt the echo of all that had transpired. The confrontation, the invitation, the confession, the community, the questions, the growth. But here now, it reaffirmed itself in a whisper. Outside, a moderators' meeting took place at the community center, organized by educators, activists, parents. They discussed adopting the center's model for broader restorative frameworks across Los Angeles schools. Shaq's face was there, in photographs, guiding the theme, forgiveness as action. The words "respond, don't react" flashed across the screen in big clean typeface. Judges, teachers, parents nodded slowly, moved by the quiet ripple they'd seen begin. Back in her condo, Brenda prepared to lead a training session. The walls were bare. She'd removed the photos of high-end listings. In their place hung a simple whiteboard. Legacy starts with listening. The room filled with staff and volunteers, 10, maybe 15 people. They all knew the story. They all had watched. Some still held reservations. Others looked to her with new expectations. Brenda began softly. I was taught to fear, without knowing, to hate, without acknowledging. Her voice trembled, but she steadied it. That's why I'm here, not for redemption, but because I need to do the hard work. She paused. My fear hurt someone I respect, someone who taught me more by not retaliating than many people ever have. She looked at each face. We will explore our discomfort. We'll question our assumptions. We'll practice listening, not defending. That's where the work begins. In the United States of 2025, such words echoed louder than any cinematic applause. In that empty hall, Brenda committed herself publicly, not to be forgiven, but to listen, to change, to build a new. That evening, Shaq returned home. Lucille was visiting, sitting at the kitchen island, sipping tea. How was the movie? She asked. He smiled knowingly. Quiet. Peaceful. He reached for her hand. Sometimes the loudest things happen when no one's speaking. She nodded, her eyes bright. And sometimes people pay attention. They stood in the stillness. The documentary played softly in the next room. A reminder, a testament. Elsewhere, Tyrell began editing a second film. It would chart the ripple effect. Brenda's work with schools, volunteers joining the center, a child who won a state speech award on the theme of forgiveness. He'd interview Aubrey, too, the daughter who walked away, and then returned, witnessing her mother's journey. He captured Brenda in motion, small acts in large silence, sweeping floors, stocking shelves, kneeling to listen. In time, he would title it Ripple Effect. Finally, the curtain closed back at the cinema. A new indie film rolled. The teen from before sat in the row ahead, now older, tablet in hand. He looked over his shoulder at Shaq again, recognized him again. The girl from before sat beside him. His sister, maybe. He's the one from that clip, right? She asked. The boy nodded. Yeah, but it's more than that. He showed how to be the better person. The mother sighed softly. A story worth remembering. Shaq watched the screen flicker, story after story, unfolding. He thought of Brenda's unsent letter, of Lucille's strength, of Tyrell's recordings, of the youth who'd seen him as coach, not celebrity. He thought of his own silent walk out of that theater, and how that same walk had set off something unexpected, and quiet, and unstoppable. He leaned back in his seat. He didn't ask for credit, didn't crave recognition. He had already done enough. He had walked away. And in that simple act, a choice to walk away rather than escalate, he had changed the world, one silence at a time. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Start the conversation at your dinner table, your classroom, your workplace, where real change begins. Challenge bias, not just in others, but in yourself. Because the next moment that matters won't go viral, you'll live it. And when you do, choose to be the one who walks forward.